Sarah's legs trembled as she pushed through the thick brush, her torn dress catching on thorns with every desperate step. The autumn wind cut through her thin clothing like ice, and her stomach cramped with a hunger she had never known before. 3 days had passed since she escaped from the burning wagon train. 3 days of running with no direction except away from the smoke and screams that still echoed in her nightmares. Her pale hands were scratched and bleeding from climbing over rocks and pushing through brambles. The leather shoes her mother had bought for her 16th birthday were now split and useless, leaving her feet raw and aching. Every shadow made her freeze in terror. Every sound of wind through leaves made her heart race. The men who had attacked their wagon train could be anywhere, hunting her like they had hunted her family. The memory of that terrible morning played over and over in her mind. She had been collecting firewood when the first shots rang out. Her father's voice calling her name, her mother's scream, the smell of gunpowder and burning canvas. By the time she crawled back to where their wagon had been, everything was ash and silence. She found no trace of her parents or her younger brother Tommy. The attackers had vanished like ghosts, leaving only destruction behind. Sarah stumbled and fell to her knees beside a small creek, her reflection in the water showing a face she barely recognized. Her brown hair hung in tangles around hollow cheeks, and her blue eyes were red from crying and sleepless nights. She cupped the cold water in her hands and drank desperately, knowing it would do little to fill the empty ache in her belly. The sun was getting lower in the sky, painting the canyon walls around her in deep orange and red. Soon it would be dark again, and she would have to find somewhere to hide. The nights were the worst part, when every sound became a threat and the cold seeped into her bones. She had tried to make a fire the first night, but the smoke might draw attention. Better to shiver in darkness than risk being found. She heard hoofbeats in the distance and her blood turned to ice. Sarah pressed herself against the rocky wall of the canyon, trying to become invisible. The sound grew closer, and she could make out voices speaking in a language she did not understand. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure they would hear it. Through a gap in the rocks she saw them. 3 men on horseback, their long black hair flowing behind them as they rode. Their skin was dark bronze in the fading light, and they wore clothing made of animal hides decorated with beads and feathers. Comanche warriors, she realized with growing terror. She had heard stories about them all her life, tales that made children hide under blankets and mothers lock their doors. The lead warrior raised his hand and the group stopped. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to see everything. He looked directly at her hiding place, and Sarah knew with sick certainty that he had spotted her. She closed her eyes and waited for the end, but instead of shouts or the sound of weapons, she heard him speaking quietly to the others. His voice was deep and calm, not filled with the violence she expected. When she opened her eyes, the other 2 warriors had ridden away, but he remained, sitting perfectly still on his paint horse. The warrior dismounted slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. He kept his hands visible and spoke in gentle tones, though she could not understand his words. Sarah pressed herself further back against the rock, but there was nowhere to go. Tears ran down her face as she waited for whatever would come next. He approached her hiding place and stopped several feet away, crouching down to make himself less threatening. In the growing darkness, she could see his face more clearly. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps in his 20s, with kind eyes that held no anger or cruelty. He spoke again, and this time she caught a few English words mixed in with his native tongue. "No hurt," he said slowly, his accent thick but his meaning clear. "You safe?" Sarah stared at him in shock. Everything she had been told about Comanche warriors said they were savage and merciless, yet this man knelt before her like he was trying to calm a frightened animal. He reached into a leather pouch at his side and pulled out something wrapped in leaves. The smell of cooked meat reached her nose and her stomach growled loudly. The warrior smiled slightly at the sound and placed the food on a flat rock between them. He gestured for her to take it, then backed away to give her space. Sarah's survival instincts warred with her fear. She was so hungry she felt dizzy, but taking food from a Comanche seemed like walking into a trap. As if he could read her thoughts, the warrior took a piece of the meat himself and ate it, showing her it was safe. Then he stood and walked back to his horse, giving her privacy to decide. In the last light of day, Sarah saw him begin setting up a small camp near a cluster of rocks. He moved with practiced efficiency, gathering dry wood and stones for a fire ring. The smell of food was driving her mad with hunger. Her hand shook as she reached for the meat, expecting him to rush forward and grab her. But the warrior continued his work, acting as if she was not even there. The food was unlike anything she had ever tasted, seasoned with herbs and perfectly cooked. She ate every bite, feeling strength return to her body for the first time in days. When she was finished, the warrior had a small fire burning. The flames danced against the canyon walls, casting warm light that pushed back the frightening shadows. He sat across the fire from her hiding place and began working on something with his hands. Sarah realized he was mending a piece of leather clothing, the domestic task so normal it made her fear seem almost silly. The night air grew colder, and despite her terror, the warmth of the fire called to her. She remained hidden in her rocky shelter, but her eyes never left the Comanche warrior who had shown her more kindness than any white man since her family died. Dawn came slowly to the canyon, painting the sky in soft pink and gold. Sarah had barely slept, watching the Comanche warrior through the long night. He had kept the fire burning steadily, adding wood whenever the flames grew low. Several times she had seen him look toward her hiding place, but he never approached or tried to force her out. When the first rays of sunlight touched the canyon floor, the warrior rose and began breaking his camp. Sarah watched him work, noting how he left no trace of his presence except the cold ashes of his fire. He moved toward his horse and panic seized her. He was leaving, and she would be alone again with nothing but the clothes on her back and the memory of one kind meal. The warrior paused beside his paint horse and looked directly at her hiding place. He said something in his language, then in halting English added, "You come. No, stay here alone. Bad men come back." The words sent ice through her veins. Bad men. He meant the ones who had destroyed her wagon train, who had killed her family. They might return to this area and she would be helpless against them. But following a Comanche warrior into the wilderness seemed equally dangerous. As if sensing her thoughts, the warrior reached into his saddlebags and pulled out a thick buffalo robe. He laid it on the ground near her hiding place along with another packet of food. Then he mounted his horse and rode a short distance away, stopping where he could still see her but giving her space to decide. Sarah looked at the warm robe and the food, then at her own torn dress and bleeding hands. She was going to die if she stayed here alone. The warrior had already shown her more mercy than she could have hoped for. Maybe, just maybe, he truly meant her no harm. She crawled out from behind the rocks, every muscle in her body aching from the cold night. The warrior watched her but made no move to approach. Sarah wrapped the buffalo robe around her shoulders, amazed by its warmth and softness. The food packet contained dried meat and some kind of flat bread that tasted of corn and nuts. When she had eaten, the warrior rode closer and dismounted. He spoke slowly in English, choosing his words carefully. "I am Ayana's brother, named Dakota, you understand?" Sarah nodded, though she was not sure who Ayana was. Dakota seemed pleased that she could follow his words. He gestured to himself and said his name again, then pointed to her with raised eyebrows. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice hoarse from days of crying and little water. "Sarah," he repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like music. "You come with Dakota. Safe place, food, warm place sleep." She wanted to ask where, why he was helping her, what he planned to do with her, but her English words seemed to have dried up with her tears. Instead, she nodded again, accepting that she had no other choice. Dakota brought his horse closer and showed her how to mount behind him. The paint horse was larger than the gentle mare she had ridden back home, but Dakota's presence seemed to calm the animal. Sarah had never ridden double before and she was terrified of falling. When Dakota told her to hold on to his waist, she hesitated only a moment before wrapping her arms around him. They rode through the morning across rolling hills covered with autumn grass. The landscape was beautiful in a wild way that Sarah had never experienced. Back in Missouri, everything had been tamed and organized. Here the land stretched endlessly in all directions, unmarked by fences or roads. Hawks circled overhead and she saw deer watching them from distant ridges. Dakota was a skilled rider, and his horse navigated rough terrain with sure footing. He spoke to her occasionally, pointing out landmarks and teaching her simple words in his language. The word for sky was different from anything she had ever heard, musical and flowing like wind through trees. When she tried to repeat it, he smiled and nodded encouragingly. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah began to relax slightly. The warmth of the buffalo robe and the steady rhythm of the horse's gait made her drowsy. Despite her fear, she found herself leaning against Dakota's strong back. He seemed to sense her exhaustion and rode more smoothly, avoiding rough spots that might wake her. They stopped at midday beside a stream surrounded by cottonwood trees. Dakota helped her down from the horse and showed her where she could wash her hands and face in the clear water. The cold stream felt wonderful on her scratched skin, and she drank deeply. Dakota unpacked more food, and they ate in companionable silence, listening to the wind in the trees and the gentle sound of water over stones. During the meal, Sarah studied his face when she thought he was not looking. His features were strong and angular, with high cheekbones and a straight nose. His skin was the color of burnished copper, and his long black hair was held back with a strip of braided leather. There were small scars on his hands and arms that spoke of a hard life, but his eyes remained kind. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked, the question that had been burning inside her since the night before. Dakota considered her words for a long time before answering. "All people. Same inside," he said slowly. "Heart same, pain same. You young, alone, afraid. I have sister, same age you. If sister lost, alone, I hope. Someone help." His broken English made his meaning even more powerful. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of fear or grief. This Comanche warrior, who was supposed to be her enemy, understood her pain better than anyone from her own people ever had. They mounted the horse again and continued their journey through the afternoon. The landscape began to change as they traveled, with red stone formations rising from the grassland like ancient castles. Sarah had never seen anything so magnificent. The rocks seemed to glow in the afternoon sun, carved by wind and water into fantastic shapes. As evening approached, Sarah saw smoke rising in the distance. Her fear returned immediately. Smoke meant people, and people might mean danger, but Dakota seemed pleased to see it, and he urged his horse toward the source. They crested a low hill, and Sarah gasped at what she saw below. A village of hide teepees spread across a meadow beside a winding creek. Horses grazed peacefully nearby, and children played between the dwellings. Smoke rose from cooking fires, carrying the smell of roasting meat and burning cedar. Sarah's heart began to race again. She was about to enter a Comanche village, something no white woman in her experience had ever done and lived to tell about it. But Dakota spoke reassuringly to her as they rode down the hill. "My people," he said simply. "You safe here?" As they rode into the village, Sarah felt every eye turn toward them. Children stopped their games to stare. Women looked up from their work, and men emerged from their teepees to see what Dakota had brought home. The attention made Sarah want to hide behind Dakota's broad back, but there was nowhere to go. The village was unlike anything Sarah had imagined. The teepees were not crude shelters, but elegant structures painted with symbols and designs in bright colors. Beautiful blankets and hides hung outside to air in the evening breeze. Gardens of corn, beans, and squash grew between some of the dwellings, tended with obvious care. A group of children ran alongside their horse, chattering excitedly in their native tongue. They seemed curious about Sarah rather than hostile, reaching up to touch her pale hands and marvel at her light brown hair. Their laughter was the same as any children's laughter, full of joy and mischief. Dakota spoke to several people as they passed, explaining something that made them nod and look at Sarah with understanding rather than suspicion. She caught a few English words mixed into his speech, and realized he was telling them about finding her alone and afraid. They stopped in front of a large teepee decorated with painted horses running across a blue sky. An elderly woman emerged, her gray hair braided with colorful ribbons and her weathered face kind but stern. She looked Sarah up and down with sharp dark eyes, taking in her torn dress and frightened expression. The woman spoke rapidly to Dakota, gesturing towards Sarah several times. Sarah could not understand the words, but the tone seemed to be scolding. Dakota replied respectfully but firmly, and after a few minutes of discussion, the woman nodded and approached Sarah. "I am Ayanna," she said in clear English that surprised Sarah. "Dakota's sister. He says you need help." Sarah slid down from the horse, her legs shaking from the long ride and her fear. "Yes, ma'am," she managed to whisper. "My family. They were killed. I have nowhere to go." Ayanna's expression softened immediately. She reached out and touched Sarah's cheek gently, the way Sarah's mother used to do. "Child, you are safe now. Come, you need food and clean clothes and rest." The older woman led Sarah toward her teepee while Dakota tended to his horse. Other villagers gathered around them, but they kept a respectful distance. Sarah noticed that many of them wore combinations of traditional clothing and items that had obviously come from white settlements. A woman stirring a pot over a fire wore a calico dress with beaded moccasins. A man mending a bridle had a white man's hat decorated with eagle feathers. Inside Ayana's teepee, Sarah was amazed by the warmth and comfort. Buffalo robes and woven blankets covered the ground, and painted leather backrests provided seating around a small fire pit. Baskets and bags hung from the teepee poles filled with herbs, tools, and household items. Everything was clean and organized, more comfortable than many white homes Sarah had known. Ayana gestured for Sarah to sit near the fire while she bustled around preparing things. She heated water in a metal pot that had clearly been traded from white settlers, then brought Sarah clean cloths and a bar of soap that smelled like pine trees. "First you wash," Ayana said kindly. "Then we find you proper clothes. You cannot wear that torn dress anymore." Sarah looked down at her ruined dress, the one her mother had sewn for her last birthday. It was the last thing she had left of her old life, but Ayana was right. It was beyond repair and provided no protection from the cold. While Sarah washed her face and hands in the warm water, Ayana prepared a meal. The food smelled wonderful, and Sarah realized she had not had a proper hot meal since before the attack on her wagon train. There was roasted meat, corn cakes, and some kind of stew with vegetables Sarah did not recognize but found delicious. "Eat," Ayana commanded gently. "You are too thin. A strong wind would blow you away." As Sarah ate, Ayana talked to her in a mixture of English and her native language. She explained that she had learned English from missionaries who had lived with their tribe for several years when she was young. Unlike many of her people, she did not hate all white people, though she had good reason to distrust them. "Your people and my people have hurt each other many times," Ayana said sadly. "But hurt does not heal with more hurt. Sometimes it heals with kindness." After Sarah had eaten her fill, Ayana brought out a beautiful dress made of soft deerskin decorated with blue and white beads. There were matching moccasins that looked like they would actually fit Sarah's feet, unlike her ruined shoes. The workmanship was exquisite, every bead placed perfectly, every seam straight and strong. "This was made for my daughter," Ayana said quietly. "She would have been about your age now. She died of the white man's disease 3 winters ago, along with many of our children." Sarah felt her heart break for this kind woman who had lost her daughter, but still found room in her home for a stranger. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Ayana nodded, touching the beautiful dress gently. She would want it to help someone who needs it. "You wear it with honor." The dress fit Sarah perfectly, as if it had been made for her. The soft leather felt warm against her skin, and the moccasins were more comfortable than any shoes she had ever worn. When she looked at her reflection in a polished metal mirror Ayana provided, she barely recognized herself. She looked like she belonged in this teepee, in this village. As night fell, people began gathering outside Ayana's teepee. Sarah could hear voices and the sound of a drum beginning a slow, steady rhythm. She looked nervously toward the entrance flap, wondering what was happening. "They come to see you," Ayana explained, "to welcome you properly. Do not be afraid. My people are curious, but they mean no harm." Dakota entered the teepee, and Sarah saw approval in his eyes when he looked at her in the traditional dress. He had changed clothes too, trading his travel-stained hunting outfit for a more formal shirt decorated with porcupine quills and painted symbols. He looked magnificent, every inch a Comanche warrior. "The council wishes to meet you," he told Sarah in English, "to hear your story and decide what to do." Fear shot through Sarah again. "What kind of decision?" she asked. Ayana put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Whether you stay with us or if we should take you to the nearest white settlement," she explained. "Some think it is too dangerous to keep you here. Others believe you have nowhere else to go." Sarah realized that her fate was about to be decided by people she had known for less than a day. Everything she had been taught told her she should want to return to white civilization. But looking around the warm teepee, thinking of Dakota's kindness and Ayana's generosity, she was not sure what she wanted anymore. The drum outside grew louder, joined by other instruments and voices singing in harmony. Sarah had never heard anything like it, haunting and beautiful and completely foreign to her ears. But something about the music called to her, making her feel less afraid and more curious about what would happen next. Dakota offered his arm to escort her outside, and after a moment's hesitation, Sarah took it. Together they stepped out into the firelight and the music, into a world she never could have imagined. The village had transformed in the darkness. A large fire burned in the center of the camp, surrounded by seated figures whose faces flickered in the dancing light. The drumming was louder now, accompanied by rattles and flutes that created music unlike anything Sarah had ever heard. Some of the villagers swayed gently to the rhythm, their movements graceful and hypnotic. Dakota led Sarah to a place near the fire where several older men sat cross-legged on buffalo robes. These were clearly the village elders, their faces lined with age and wisdom, their clothing rich with beadwork and feathers that spoke of honor and respect within the tribe. Sarah's heart hammered as she took her place beside Dakota, feeling the weight of many eyes upon her. The eldest man, his hair white as snow and his back straight despite his obvious age, studied Sarah for a long moment before speaking. His voice was deep and commanding, and though Sarah could not understand his words, she heard both authority and kindness in them. "He is Chief Running Bear," Dakota translated quietly. "He asks me to tell your story, so the council can understand why I brought you here." Sarah listened as Dakota spoke in his native tongue, occasionally gesturing toward her, or using his hands to illustrate parts of the tale. She heard her English name mixed into his words, and caught enough to understand he was describing the wagon train attack and finding her alone and frightened in the canyon. When Dakota finished speaking, several of the council members asked questions. The discussion grew animated at times, with some voices raised in what sounded like disagreement. Sarah wished desperately that she could understand what they were saying about her fate. Finally, Chief Running Bear raised his hand for silence. He spoke directly to Sarah, and though she could not follow his words, his tone was gentle and encouraging. Dakota leaned close to translate. "He says you may speak for yourself now. Tell us who you are, where you came from, what happened to your family." Sarah's mouth went dry. She had never spoken to a group of adults before, let alone a council of Comanche elders who would decide her future. But looking at their faces in the firelight, she saw patience and genuine interest rather than hostility. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Several people leaned forward to hear her better. "My family was traveling to Oregon Territory. We were part of a wagon train with 12 families, all looking for new land to farm." She paused as Dakota translated her words for those who did not speak English. When he nodded for her to continue, she took a deep breath and went on. 3 days ago, we were attacked. I don't know who did it, but they weren't—" She stopped, realizing she had been about to say they were not Indians. Looking around at the faces surrounding her, she chose different words. "They were white men, I think. Outlaws or raiders. They killed everyone and burned everything." The translation of these words caused murmurs of sympathy and anger around the fire. Sarah saw several women wipe their eyes, and some of the warriors' faces darkened with fury. These people understood loss and violence perhaps better than anyone. "I hid until they were gone," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "Then I ran. I've been running for 3 days, hiding, trying to find help. I would have died if Dakota hadn't found me." She looked at the young warrior who had saved her life, seeing pride and concern in his expression. "He gave me food and shelter and brought me here, even though I was afraid of him at first. He's been kinder to me than anyone since my family died." Chief Running Bear listened to the translation, then asked a question that made several council members nod seriously. "He asks if you have other family," Dakota explained. "Relatives who would be looking for you, who would come here seeking revenge if harm came to you." The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had been so focused on survival that she had not really considered the broader implications of her situation. "No," she said quietly. "My parents were taking our whole family west to start over. We have no relatives in this territory, and no one back in Missouri who would know what happened to us." This answer seemed to satisfy some concerns around the fire, but raised new ones. Another elder, a stern-faced woman with silver braids, spoke at length to the chief. "She is concerned," Dakota translated, "that keeping you here will bring trouble. If white soldiers come looking, they will not listen to explanations. They will assume we took you against your will." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. If they decided she was too dangerous to keep, where would they take her? The nearest white settlement might be hundreds of miles away, and she would be just as lost and helpless as she had been in the canyon. "But where else can I go?" she asked, unable to keep the desperation out of her voice. "I have no money, no family, no skills except the household things my mother taught me. If you take me to a town, I'll just end up begging in the streets or worse. Her honesty seemed to move several of the council members. A middle-aged warrior with kind eyes spoke up, and Sarah caught enough English words to understand he was arguing in her favor. The discussion continued for what felt like hours. Sarah sat quietly, watching the faces around the fire and trying to gauge how the debate was going. Some people seemed firmly against keeping her, while others appeared sympathetic to her plight. The council was clearly divided. Finally, a new voice joined the conversation. A young woman about Sarah's age approached the fire, leading a small boy by the hand. Sarah recognized her immediately as someone she had seen earlier, tending to children near the horses. The woman was beautiful, with intelligent dark eyes and long hair decorated with small shells and beads. The young woman spoke passionately to the council, gesturing toward Sarah several times. Her words seemed to carry special weight, and Sarah noticed that even the stern-faced elder woman listened respectfully. "That is Grey Dove," Dakota whispered to Sarah. "She lost her husband in a raid by white soldiers last spring. She speaks for the younger women who have children." When Grey Dove finished speaking, she walked directly to Sarah and knelt beside her. She took Sarah's hands in her own and spoke in careful English. "I tell council that women know about loss," she said. "We know about being alone and afraid. You are just girl, like I was just girl when soldiers took my husband. We help each other or we all die alone." The simple wisdom of her words seemed to settle over the gathering like a blanket. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes at the kindness of this young widow who had every reason to hate white people, but chose compassion instead. Chief Running Bear called for quiet again, and this time when he spoke, his words carried the weight of final decision. Sarah held her breath as Dakota translated. "The council has decided," Dakota said solemnly. "You may stay with us through the winter. When spring comes, if you still wish to return to your own people, we will help you find them. But if you choose to remain here, you will be welcome as one of us." Relief flooded through Sarah so powerfully that she almost collapsed. She was safe, at least for now. She would have food and shelter and the protection of these people who had already shown her more kindness than she had dared hope for. "Thank you," she whispered, then said it louder so everyone could hear. "Thank you all. I promise I'll work hard and earn my place here." The formal council meeting dissolved into a celebration, with the drumming resuming and several people beginning to dance around the fire. Children who had been hiding behind their parents during the serious discussion now ran forward to get a closer look at Sarah. Their curiosity was infectious, and she found herself smiling for the first time since her world had been destroyed. Ayanna appeared at her side, beaming with maternal pride. "Come," she said. "Now you must meet everyone properly. You are part of our family now." The weeks that followed were unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Each day brought new challenges and discoveries as she learned to live in a world completely different from the one she had known. The Comanche way of life demanded skills she had never needed before, but the people around her were patient teachers. Ayanna became like a second mother to her, showing her how to prepare buffalo meat, how to scrape and tan hides, and how to gather the wild plants that provided medicine and food. Sarah's hands, soft from her protected life in Missouri, grew strong and capable. Her fingers learned to weave grass into baskets and to sew with sinew thread that would never break. The work was hard, but Sarah found satisfaction in mastering each new task. When she successfully started her first fire using traditional methods, lighting dry grass with sparks from flint and steel, the women around her cheered as if she had performed a miracle. When her first attempt at making corn cakes turned out edible, Ayanna hugged her with genuine pride. Grey Dove became her closest friend among the younger women. Despite the language barrier, they found ways to communicate through gestures, simple words, and shared laughter. Grey Dove taught Sarah how to identify medicinal plants and how to weave the intricate patterns that decorated Comanche clothing. In return, Sarah shared stories about her old life, teaching Grey Dove some English words and showing her how white women styled their hair. The children of the village adopted Sarah completely, following her around like a pack of curious puppies. They seemed fascinated by her pale skin and light hair, often touching her arms to see if the color would rub off. Their games were different from what Sarah had known, but children's laughter translated perfectly across cultures. A boy named Little Wolf, perhaps 8 years old, became especially attached to her. His father had died in the same raid that took Grey Dove's husband, and his mother had been killed by disease the previous winter. He lived with his grandmother now, but he seemed to find comfort in Sarah's presence. Perhaps they recognized something similar in each other, two people who had lost their families and were learning to build new ones. Little Wolf appointed himself Sarah's guide and protector, showing her the best places to find berries, warning her about plants that should not be touched, and teaching her words in his language. His English was better than most of the adults, learned from the same missionaries who had taught Ayanna years before. "You are getting strong," he told her one afternoon, as they returned from gathering firewood. "First day I think wind blow you away like feather. Now you carry wood like Comanche woman." Sarah laughed, realizing he was right. The constant physical work had changed her body in ways she was only beginning to notice. Her arms and legs were stronger, her back straighter, her hands sure and steady. The soft, sheltered girl who had left Missouri was disappearing, replaced by someone harder and more capable. Dakota remained a steady presence in her life, though he was often away hunting or scouting with other warriors. When he was in the village, he continued teaching her his language and helping her understand the complex social rules that governed Comanche life. She learned that he was considered one of the finest warriors of his generation, respected for his skill in battle and his wisdom in counsel. "Why did you help me that first night?" she asked him one evening as they sat by Ayanna's fire. "You could have just ridden past and left me there." Dakota was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful and sad. "When I was boy, maybe 10 winters old, Comanche raiders attacked White Settlement," he said slowly. "I was too young to fight, but I came with the war party to learn. After the battle, I found White Girl hiding in burned cabin. She was about your age, very afraid, crying for her mother." Sarah held her breath, afraid of what he might say next. "Other warriors wanted to leave her there," Dakota continued. "Said she would slow us down, bring trouble. But I saw her eyes, same fear I saw in your eyes. Same pain I would feel if I lost my family. I asked them to bring her with us." "What happened to her?" Sarah asked quietly. "She lived with us for 2 years," Dakota replied. "Learned our ways, became like sister to me and Ayanna. But she never stopped wanting to go home to white people. Finally, we took her to trading post where soldiers found her and returned her to relatives in the east." The story explained so much about why Dakota had been willing to help a white girl alone in the wilderness, but it also raised uncomfortable questions about her own future. "Do you think I'll want to leave too?" Sarah asked. Dakota looked at her seriously. "That is for you to decide when spring comes. But I think you are different from her. She always looked backward toward the life she lost. You look forward, learning new things each day." As autumn turned to winter, Sarah began to understand what Dakota meant. The girl she had been in Missouri felt like someone from a dream, soft and helpless and dependent on others for everything. This new version of herself was someone she actually liked better, even though the life was harder. The first snowfall came early, blanketing the village in pristine white that reminded Sarah painfully of home. She stood outside Ayanna's teepee watching the flakes fall, remembering how her mother used to make snow ice cream and her brother Tommy would beg to stay outside until his lips turned blue. Little Wolf found her there, tears freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. "You think about old family," he said, not asking but stating a fact. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "I think about my mother and father too," Little Wolf said quietly. "Especially when snow comes, because my father taught me to track animals in snow. But grandmother says our people who die do not really leave us. They live in our hearts, in the things they taught us." The boy's simple wisdom helped ease the sharp edge of Sarah's grief. She knelt down and hugged him, this child who had lost even more than she had but still found ways to comfort others. "What did your father teach you about tracking?" she asked. Little Wolf's face lit up with pride. For the rest of the afternoon, he showed her how to read the stories written in snow by passing animals. Rabbit tracks that looked like tiny hands, deer prints that told of a doe and her fawn searching for winter browse, the larger marks of a coyote that had passed through in the early morning. That evening, as the village settled in for the long winter months, Sarah realized something had changed inside her. The constant ache of missing her family was still there, but it no longer threatened to overwhelm her. She was learning to carry her grief like the Comanche women carried their children, close to her heart but not letting it stop her from moving forward. The winter deepened, bringing storms that lasted for days and temperatures that made her grateful for the warmth of the teepee and the thick buffalo robes. The whole village drew closer together during these harsh months, sharing food and fuel and the comfort of human company. Stories were told around the fires, legends and histories that stretched back generations. Sarah learned that the Comanche had not always lived on the plains. They had come from the mountains long ago, following the horses that Spanish explorers had brought to the New World. The horses had changed everything, transforming a people who had struggled to survive into masters of the vast grasslands. Horse gave us freedom, Ayana explained one snowy evening as she worked on a new pair of moccasins for Sarah. Before horse, we walk everywhere, carry everything on our backs. After horse, we could follow buffalo herds, could move camp in one day, could travel to trade with tribes far away. But horses also brought trouble, added an elderly man named Standing Eagle, who often joined their evening conversations. White men wanted our horses, our land, our way of life to disappear. They could not understand that we belonged to the land, not the other way around. These conversations helped Sarah understand the complex relationship between her birth people and her adopted family. Both sides had done terrible things to each other, driven by fear and misunderstanding and competing needs. But individuals on both sides were capable of kindness and compassion, as Dakota and Ayana had proven. As the winter solstice approached, the village prepared for important ceremonies that would help ensure the return of spring. Sarah was honored to be included in the preparations, learning to make special foods and helping to gather the materials needed for sacred objects. "You are truly one of us now," Grey Dove told her as they worked together grinding corn for the ceremony. "When spring comes, if you choose to stay, the council will give you a Comanche name. You will be reborn as daughter of our people." The idea both thrilled and terrified Sarah. To accept a Comanche name would mean letting go of her old identity completely, becoming someone entirely new. But as she looked around at the people who had become her family, she wondered if that transformation had already begun. Little Wolf had been right about her growing strength. The physical changes were obvious, but the changes inside her ran even deeper. The frightened girl who had hidden behind rocks in the canyon had been replaced by someone who could face whatever challenges came. She had found a kind of courage she never knew she possessed, forged in the fires of loss and tempered by the kindness of strangers who had become family. The winter ceremonies were beautiful and moving, filled with music and dancing and prayers for renewal. Sarah participated as much as she was allowed. Spring came slowly to the plains, marked first by the return of migrating birds and the appearance of tiny green shoots pushing through the last patches of snow. Sarah felt her heart lift with each sign of renewal, but also felt the weight of the decision that was approaching. The village council had kept their promise to let her choose her path when winter ended. The first real warmth of spring brought visitors to the village. A group of traders arrived with pack horses loaded with goods, bringing news from the outside world that made Sarah's stomach clench with anxiety. There had been more conflicts between whites and Indians throughout the territory. Army patrols were searching for missing settlers, and tensions were higher than they had been in years. "They look for white girl taken by Comanche," one of the traders told Dakota in English, not knowing that Sarah could understand every word. "Soldiers say they kill any Indian found with white captive." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Her presence here was putting everyone she cared about in danger. If soldiers came looking for her and found her living willingly with the Comanche, they would not listen to explanations. They would assume she had been kidnapped and would take their revenge on the entire village. That night, she lay sleepless in her robes, staring up at the smoke hole in the teepee and wrestling with an impossible choice: stay with the people who had become her family and risk bringing destruction on them, or leave the only home where she had ever truly belonged. By morning, her decision was made. She found Dakota checking his horses in the early dawn light, preparing for a hunting trip that would take him away from the village for several days. "I have to leave," she told him without preamble. "The trader's news. If soldiers come looking for me and find me here, people will die because of me. I won't let that happen." Dakota studied her face in the growing light, seeing the pain and determination there. "Where will you go?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Maybe find a town somewhere, try to start over with a new name. I've learned enough skills here that I could work, maybe as a seamstress or helping in someone's kitchen." "And Little Wolf?" Dakota asked. "Grey Dove? Ayana? You would leave them without saying goodbye?" The mention of the people she loved most made Sarah's resolve waver. Little Wolf still ran to greet her every morning, bringing her wildflowers or interesting rocks he had found. Gray Dove had become like the sister she had never had. And Ayana had filled the terrible void left by her mother's death. "It would be easier if I just disappeared," Sarah said, though the words felt like lies in her mouth. "Clean break, no long goodbyes." Dakota was quiet for a long moment, his hands gentle on his horse's neck. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "There is another choice," he said. "One that might let you stay without bringing danger to the village." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering directly, Dakota asked her to wait while he spoke with Chief Running Bear. Sarah spent the day in an agony of uncertainty, helping with the usual tasks, but unable to concentrate on anything. Ayana noticed her distraction but did not press for explanations, though her worried glances said she suspected something was wrong. Late in the afternoon, Dakota returned with news that changed everything. The tribal council had met in emergency session and come up with a plan that might allow Sarah to remain safely with them. "There is a place," Dakota explained as they walked beside the stream that ran through the village. 3 days' ride from here in the mountains, a hidden valley where our people go when they need to disappear from the white man's world. If you truly wish to stay with us, you could live there until the danger passes." "Alone?" Sarah asked, the thought of isolation in the wilderness filling her with dread. "Not alone," Dakota said, and something in his voice made her look at him more carefully. "I would go with you, and Little Wolf if he chooses. His grandmother is old and tired. She would be grateful to know he was cared for." The implications of what he was suggesting slowly sank in. Dakota was offering to give up his life in the village, his status as a warrior, his place among his people to keep her safe in exile. The magnitude of his sacrifice took her breath away. "Why would you do that for me?" she whispered. Dakota stopped walking and turned to face her fully. In the golden light of late afternoon, his face was serious but peaceful. "Because somewhere between the canyon where I found you and now, you stopped being a white girl I was helping," he said simply. "You became the woman I cannot imagine living without." Sarah felt her heart stop, then start again with a rhythm that seemed to shake her whole body. She had sensed something growing between them over the long winter months, but had been afraid to name it, afraid to hope that her feelings might be returned. "Dakota," she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "I do not ask you to love me as I love you," he said, "only to let me protect you, to let me be the family you need. Little Wolf needs a mother, and I need you to be safe and happy, even if that is all I can ever have." The honesty in his voice, the love and pain and hope all mixed together, broke down the last barriers around Sarah's heart. She reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses from years of bowstrings and horse reins, the strength that had pulled her up from despair. "I do love you," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself. But I love you and Little Wolf, and this life we could build together." The smile that spread across Dakota's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He pulled her close. And for the first time since her family died, Sarah felt completely safe and completely home. They were married 3 days later, in a ceremony that blended Comanche traditions with Sarah's own heritage. She wore the beautiful dress Ayana had given her, decorated with new beadwork that the women of the village had added as wedding gifts. Dakota wore his finest ceremonial clothing, his hair braided with eagle feathers and his chest painted with symbols of protection and prosperity. Little Wolf stood proudly beside them, wearing new moccasins and a shirt Sarah had made for him. When the ceremony was complete and he officially became their son, his joy was so bright it brought tears to everyone's eyes. The hidden valley Dakota had spoken of turned out to be a place of incredible beauty, sheltered by tall cliffs and watered by a clear stream that never ran dry. There were caves that provided shelter in the harshest weather, meadows perfect for growing crops, and game trails that promised they would never go hungry. They built their home there together, a sturdy cabin that combined the best of both their worlds. Sarah used the skills Ayana had taught her to create a comfortable interior, while Dakota's knowledge of the land helped them establish gardens and hunting grounds that would sustain them for years to come. Little Wolf thrived in their mountain sanctuary, growing tall and strong under his new parents' loving care. Sarah taught him to read and write in English, while Dakota made sure he never forgot his Comanche heritage and the proud history of his people. Years passed peacefully in their hidden valley. Sarah bore 2 more children, a daughter with her light eyes and Dakota's dark hair, and a son who looked exactly like his father. The family she had lost to violence had been replaced by one built on love and choice and mutual respect. Sometimes travelers brought news from the outside world. The conflicts between whites and Indians continued, but gradually the immediate danger passed. Sarah could have returned to white society if she chose, but the thought never seriously occurred to her. Her life was here with the man who had shared his fire when she was fading away, and the son who had offered her food when she was starving for more than just nourishment. She had been hunted by tragedy and loss, but she had found something better than mere survival. She had found home and love and a family that had been chosen rather than inherited. In losing everything, she had discovered who she was meant to be. The frightened girl who had hidden behind rocks in a canyon was gone forever, replaced by a strong woman who could face any challenge as long as she had her family beside her. And in the evening firelight of their mountain home, surrounded by the voices of her children and the steady presence of the warrior who had become her heart, Sarah knew she had found exactly where she belonged.